A los golpes.
Trading blows. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president whose term has expired, and Viktor Orban, the Hungarian prime minister, were at the center of a new, unrestricted clash. Just like that memorable altercation in Buenos Aires back in late 2023, when Zelensky and Orban almost started a fistfight in front of the cameras, this time the Ukrainian president and the Hungarian prime minister exchanged accusations and insults, calling each other things like hypocrite, immoral, and bully, among other choice words. To make matters worse, their respective foreign ministers also got involved in this new round. Peter Szijjártó for Hungary and Andriy Sybiha for Ukraine. Could we be witnessing the beginning of a new armed conflict? Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning.
Muy buenas noches, muy buenas tardes y muy buenos días. Desde Berlín, Alemania, comenzamos la
From Berlin, Germany, we begin the 269th broadcast of Demolishing Political Myths Live. Thank you very much for joining us, as always, and please remember to help us out with a like, a thumbs up against censorship. Demolishers, a new round between two heavyweights. Everyone will surely remember that incident in Buenos Aires in December 2023, during the inauguration of the then newly elected Argentine president Javier Milei. His advisors, foolishly, with as little tact and as much ignorance as Milei himself, decided to seat Zelensky and Orban next to each other at Milei's inauguration ceremony. And of course, a quarrel broke out. An exchange of accusations began, almost coming to blows, right in front of the cameras of the world's media.
A las manos frente a las cámaras de los medios mundiales. Aquí las imágenes de aquel entonces para contextualizar un poco.
Here are the images from back then, to provide some context, because, in this case, in what we're about to present in just a moment, we're witnessing in some way the second or even third round between these two. This is the situation at that time, December 2023. Pay attention. What matters here is the image, not the reporter's commentary during the broadcast. A silly woman describing things that make no sense, while the cameras, without much knowledge, because surely the director of cameras back then lacked the necessary knowledge to determine who was Zelensky and who was Orban, simply showed the discussion in the chamber of the Argentine Congress, in the Chamber of Deputies of Argentina, between two heads of state from somewhere. They couldn't determine from where, but these are the images.
Ahí, Zelensky enojado, Orban respondiendo.
Zelensky angry, Orban responding, both gesturing. Someone is trying to mediate, as if saying, "No, guys, calm down." And there's the overhead shot. Pay attention to how Zelensky back then cornered him against a wall, into a corner in the Argentine parliament. It's in the Chamber of Deputies of the Argentine Congress itself, both of them gesturing. Well, then you'll also remember those pathetic images of, well, two agents of the United States. The outgoing president, the comedian-in-chief, Volodymyr Zelensky, and, well, how do you even describe him, right? It's just getting worse and worse. That's the image. On the other hand, there's Milei, right?
Esta es la imagen. Por otro lado, Milei, ¿no? El representante de los Estados Unidos.
The representative of the United States in Argentina, within the framework of an occupation government like his. Well, this is the first round, December 2023. I don't want to abandon, in my fury against the president of my country, the topic. The clashes, the altercations between two heads of state, heads of government. President Zelensky, although his term has expired, yes, in reality, hardly a president. We could also characterize him as an autocrat, a dictator, governing under martial law and with his mandate having expired long ago, against the Ukrainian constitution itself. And on the other hand, the conservative prime minister, Viktor Orban.
Ucraniana y por otro lado el primer ministro conservador Viktor Orban. Primer round en aquel entonces.
First round back then, a few months later, another exchange that was also quite heated, not as much, but still. This one here is at the Security Council. There's Michel, who at that time was president of the Security Council, now Costa. Back then it was the Belgian Michel, somehow also keeping things under control, as if saying, guys, calm down, no fighting. Zelensky at that time still always dressed like a little soldier. And here's the moment when the two greet each other. This strange thing where, at the European Union Leaders' Council, the European Council, for some reason Zelensky participates, who, well, in any case, would represent the president of Ukraine, a country outside the European Union. Yes, Ukraine is not a member of the European Union. Therefore, in this council, those who should have participated, or should have participated back then, these images, by the way, are from 2024, June 2024, if I remember correctly, mid-last year. Well, for some reason, Zelensky was participating in all the European Council meetings, alongside the European Union leaders. And here's the moment of the greeting back then. They rearranged things to the other side because they didn't want to show that. And pay attention here again. Yes, yes, every time, right? Up close, looking into each other's eyes, this time, not as intense as the other, one cornered against the wall, but right? Laser stares, right? At any moment, a quick jab to the nose.
En cualquier momento, el cortito a la nariz, ting. Bueno, eso en aquel entonces, el segundo round.
Well, back then, the second round, speculation, yes, no. No, the look on her face, incredible, my goodness. What madness. And the director of cameras, whenever possible, would redirect attention elsewhere, but everyone was focused on that confrontation. Well, there, Brogan responds, wow, Borrell was still around back then. Now, today, faced with belligerence and utter, total and absolute ignorance. Why is Kaja Kallas there, if Borrell hadn't yet left his post as the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs at that time? If I remember correctly, the Europeans had already chosen Kaja Kallas by then, but her term hadn't started yet.
Pero todavía no había comenzado su mandato. Sí aparecía como jefa de la diplomacia europea.
She appeared as the head of European diplomacy, elected before the start of her term. Borrell's term had not yet expired. Borrell, by the way, a total furious anti-Russian warmonger, but not as ignorant, not as illiterate as Kaja Kallas. Today we remember him. Back then it was painful to witness the outrageous things Borrell said, but today we almost remember him fondly. Well, no, I take that back. Not fondly. But we remember him as someone less bad than the current head of European diplomacy. Kaja Kallas, a complete brainless person, frankly.
Una completa descerebrada, directamente. Pero bueno, aquel el segundo enfrentamiento.
Well, that was the second confrontation. And in this third opportunity, Zelensky, who else, decided to start a new chapter, a new round, we should call it that, in this fight with an accusation, a very serious accusation, by the way. Here, in this post, we present it. Here is the original post in English, accompanied below by the post in Ukrainian. Well, yesterday's post from Zelensky, I held a military briefing. Present were the Commander-in-Chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, the Chief of the General Staff, Andriy Natov, the Minister of Defense, etc., etc.
Andriy Natov, el Ministro de Defensa, etc., etc. Se presentaron informes sobre las líneas del frente, así como sobre las...
Reports were presented on the front lines, as well as on the situation at the border. Well, this report summarizes the military situation in Ukraine from the Ukrainian perspective. The situation at this moment, by the way, in the city of Luhansk, is truly desperate for Ukraine. The city has already been penetrated by Russian forces, and an encirclement has begun. This is going to determine the fall of one of Ukraine's main cities in the Donbass. And well, not only will this have military consequences in terms of further advances, but also naturally political consequences due to the fall of this city. But anyway, that's not the topic right now.
Políticas por la caída de esto, pero bueno, ese no es el tema ahora. En este largo posteo.
In this long post, in the last paragraph right here, suddenly, out of nowhere, Zelensky started with this. Attention, the commander-in-chief also reported recent drone incidents on the border between Ukraine and Hungary. Ukrainian forces recorded violations of our airspace by reconnaissance drones, probably Hungarian. Preliminary assessments suggest they may have been conducting reconnaissance of the industrial potential of Ukraine's border areas. I instructed that all available information be checked and urgent reports be prepared on each recorded incident.
Sobre cada incidente registrado. Y como ilustración esta muy marcial.
And as an illustration, this very martial image of Zelensky. Specifically, an accusation against Hungary for violating airspace with reconnaissance drones, and in the subtext, subtly expressed as well, Hungary's ambition to reconquer Transcarpathia or reclaim Ukrainian territories that historically belonged to Hungary. That's why there's this. Preliminary assessments suggest they may have been conducting reconnaissance of the industrial potential of Ukraine's border areas. It's as if they're starting reconnaissance because they're going to want to capture the territories in Ukraine that are historically Hungarian.
Los territorios históricamente húngaros. Algo discutido más de una oportunidad.
This has been discussed on more than one occasion in the context of Ukraine's military situation. The military collapse of Ukraine could result not only in the annexation of a significant part of Ukraine by Russia, the territories already claimed by Russia, and perhaps even some more, like the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Why not Kharkiv as well? Why not all of Ukraine up to the Dnieper? The Russians certainly don't want more than that. Because on the other side of the Dnieper are the Ukrainian ultranationalists. Occupying those territories would be a headache for Russia. More or less, remember, Ukraine is divided into two parts by the Dnieper River.
Presenta dos partes divididas por el río Dnieper, a la derecha la prorrusa, a la izquierda la anti.
On the right, the pro-Russian side. On the left, the anti-Russian Ukrainian nationalist side. But within the Ukrainian nationalist part, to the left of the Dnieper, well, remember that there are territories up north that historically belonged to Poland, right? Where, by the way, the Ukrainian nationalists, led by Bandera at the time, carried out a massacre, the Volhynia massacre, against Poles, Jews, and also non-Jews, right? Therefore, the Poles would still want those territories. And further south, in Transcarpathia. This isn't the main topic, but I'm providing context, presenting it as part of the subtext behind this accusation from Zelensky. In Transcarpathia, an area within Ukraine's current borders, that region is inhabited by a Hungarian minority, because historically, that Transcarpathian area was part of Hungary, right? And the Hungarians also want to reclaim that, right? And in the event of a military collapse of the Ukrainian state, it's very likely that, just as Russia would advance from the right, there would also be a bite taken out of the northwest, to the left of the Dnieper, up in the northwest, where Poland would also take a bite. And in the area to the left of the Dnieper, in the southwest, that's where Hungary would make its move. And that's where the accusation lies.
Hungría. Y esta es la acusación, ¿sí? Para colmo todo esto en un contexto ya muy caliente.
To top it all off, all this is happening in an already very heated context, really very heated, over the last 2 weeks or week and a half, with all the accusations regarding the alleged violation by Russia of the airspace of Poland, the Baltic countries, the alleged. Actually, let's remember, it all started, all this began with Ursula von der Leyen's accusation in Bulgaria. Sorry, yes, in Bulgaria indeed at Sofia Airport, if my memory serves me right. Out of nowhere, unexpectedly, she made a very harsh accusation, but also an unprecedented one, truly unexpected, regarding the supposed attack on the GPS signal of her plane before landing in Sofia. That's how she presented it. The Russians perpetrated an attack against the GPS signals necessary for the control and landing of my plane in Sofia. And that created a huge risk and meant that the pilots of my plane had to land using paper maps, like in the old days. Well, shortly after, the Bulgarian authorities came out rejecting this.
Búlgaras rechazando esto, ¿sí? En primer lugar, estas caídas del sistema de GPS.
First of all, these outages of the European GPS system apparently are becoming more frequent. issues often arise. And secondly, they couldn't even determine whether that GPS system outage, that GPS positioning outage, had actually caused a problem for von der Leyen's plane. So, they didn't even start an investigation into such a trivial matter. And as a result, soon after, evidence emerged that the entire accusation from von der Leyen was a lie, that it was a deliberate provocation by von der Leyen. But, based on that, all the Eastern European countries, or at least all the most anti-Russian ones, began their own operations. First, with the 19 Russian drones flying over Polish territory.
Volando sobre territorio polaco. ¿Sí? Inmediatamente después, ¿sí? Generó el campo fértil.
Immediately afterward, von der Leyen created fertile ground with her political message. From now on, all of you can start false flag operations. And they did. First Poland, with the 19 drones. Of the 19 drones, in the end, there was no evidence at all. Just those truly hilarious photos of a drone taped with adhesive to a chicken coop. An unbelievable thing, right? In an area beyond the flight range of those drones, so no drone coming from Russia, or from the areas taken by Russia in Ukraine, could have made the trip there with its flight range. Obviously then, they began their supposed flight, in the event that they didn't just place those drones on the chicken coop there directly, plain and simple. Well, they obviously started it from Ukraine. And, by the way, a tiny chicken coop, with a thin sheet of zinc on top, that thin. And even so, the drone somehow descended, didn't cause any damage. The envy of the F-35s with vertical takeoff, right? It came down like a flying saucer, didn't even leave a scratch on the chicken coop's roof. Well, that's the second opportunity, or the second incident, in this context of deliberately heating up the situation, looking for a spark to start a direct confrontation with Russia. Once again, initiated by von der Leyen with a provably false accusation. Then followed by the Poles with the drones, by the way, according to intelligence sources received. Yesterday, regarding the supposedly Russian drones found, which were not 19, but fewer, apparently between 3 and 8, discovered on Polish territory, once again, beyond their flight range, reconnaissance drones, Russia immediately, of course, responded. In the event that a Russian drone malfunctioned or deviated from its course during an attack on Ukraine, they had no targets in Poland and are willing to investigate the incident. But well, the Poles rejected all of this. They don't want any investigation. What investigation? But apparently, in those drones that were found, inside, each one had a feature of these drones, a connection to cell phone antennas. That's part of the navigation system, with a chip, a card, a SIM card, SIM. Well, depending on the country, they call them different things. Sometimes they're called chips, SIM cards. Well, what do they call them? The cards for mobile phones, for mobile cell phones. But there weren't any Russian SIM cards. Instead, there were Ukrainian and Swedish SIM cards. Clear evidence that this false flag attack was started, obviously, by the Ukrainians. It's the second incident. After that, Russian planes flying over European territory. The MiG-31, if I remember correctly, photographed over Estonia. Well, that was also proven to be fake. The same photo used 20 times. They didn't even enter Estonian national airspace, but supposedly the European recognition zone. The Russians denied this, and once again, according to intelligence sources, they would not have violated any airspace. Furthermore, the violations of the airspace of neighboring countries. In fact, regarding airspace violations, we actually should not present this as a violation of airspace, because what is at issue here is the area prior to the sovereign airspace of the countries. The preliminary recognition zone, a sort of buffer zone beforehand. Apparently all lies as well. But even if a Russian plane had appeared in that situation, these incidents are common. They proliferate within the framework of relations between major powers.
Las grandes potencias, a menudo un caza estadounidense.
Often, a US fighter jet appears in an area near Russia, and 2 Russian interceptors escort it, accompanying it back to the country, to US territory. The same thing happens in reverse, with Russians and Americans, and the same with other countries in the region. These incidents sometimes proliferate unintentionally, simply because a plane appears in a nearby area and 2 others accompany it, as if protecting their own airspace, and sometimes as a way to test the enemy's defenses, their disposition, their level of preparedness. It's something that happens every day, practically. Not literally every day, but there are multiple incidents throughout the year, dozens of incidents, and suddenly it was presented as a Russian provocation, as if it were the start of World War III. Third incident then, in a heated week, and once again all the suspicions of a false flag incident. All of them. All of them. So von der Leyen, Russian drones in Poland, Russian planes in Estonia. The Russians are so bad. Huh. Always there. Unbelievable. And finally now, Hungarian drones. Hungarian drones over Ukraine. And that's how this started. I left aside the dispute between Zelensky and Orban a bit, but I wanted to recap what happened, because this is the context. False flag operations to generate an escalation with the usual objective. They want Russia to react to provocations with an attack on Europeans, or directly with a European attack on the Russians, without any serious reason. From there, an escalation, and for Daddy United States to get involved in defense of Ukraine and Europe. That has basically been the goal since the beginning of this war. But of course, suddenly Hungary got involved here, a European country, and by the way, a NATO member. And without hesitation, just 2 hours later, Hungary responded, and responded forcefully. First, the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Péter Szijjártó, said the following. Pay attention. Here is the original post in English. On his account, Péter Szijjártó, the Hungarian language is so difficult that he posts only in English, because Hungarian is incomprehensible. By the way, the sound of it is actually quite sweet.
Por cierto, el sonido bastante dulce, ¿no? En mi viaje hace 2 semanas a Bulgaria pude presenciar conversaciones.
On my trip to Bulgaria 2 weeks ago, I was able to witness conversations between Hungarians on the street, and the sound is very pleasant. But then, seeing the words on the signs, it's incomprehensible. 700 accents to one side, words with double accents to one side, to the other, incomprehensible. Well, here's the answer in English. Sorry for the anecdote. Péter Szijjártó, President Zelensky of Ukraine, is losing his mind over his anti-Hungarian obsession. Now he's starting to see things that don't exist. Incredible. He's losing his mind over his anti-Hungarian obsession. Now he's starting to see things that don't exist. On top of that, with irony, and this was at first, just minutes after this, a slightly more serious and also tougher response in political terms.
Más dura en términos políticos. Atención a la segunda parte de...
Pay attention to the second part of the response from Péter Szijjártó, Orban's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Ukraine has been implementing an anti-Hungarian policy for 10 years. Ukraine has been implementing an anti-Hungarian policy for 10 years. The Hungarian community in Transcarpathia was deprived of its rights. A Hungarian was beaten to death during forced conscription. The pipeline essential for Hungary's energy supply was attacked. And now Hungarian military leaders are banned from entering Ukraine. And in return, they expect our support for their accession to the European Union. They can't be serious. Well, now it's tough. Before, well, it was tough too, but funny, ironic.
Antes, bueno, duro también, pero gracioso, irónico. Este tweet durísimo.
This tweet is extremely harsh. And as context for this, let's first remember the discrimination reported by Hungarians for years in Ukraine. The Hungarian minority once again in Transcarpathia. The incident mentioned here of a Hungarian beaten to death by Zelensky's gangs. The gangs of recruiters, the forced recruiters, or the recruiters within the framework of forced mobilization in Ukraine, which we often present here. Videos of people being beaten, even, well, more than that too. many cases of people killed during forced mobilization due to the violence of these gangsters, these thugs, from the TCC, which is the name of the mobilization agency.
El TCC es el nombre de la agencia de movilización. Y poco tiempo atrás pudimos...
And not long ago, we were able to... Well, one of these cases was documented, and we were able to witness it. We didn't show it on the channel for obvious reasons, but we were able to witness it. Yes, those of us who follow this saw the case of a member of the Hungarian minority in Ukraine beaten to death by these police officers. How can we describe them? Thugs, bullies, gangsters from the Ukrainian military mobilization agency, and this triggered a very harsh reaction in Hungary. It generated a lot of outrage, particularly because of how violent and horrible it was. A poor guy beaten until he collapsed. And this is not just an isolated incident, but rather part of the accusation that the Ukrainian government is carrying out a much broader mobilization in Transcarpathia, in the area of the Hungarian minority, than in the areas of Ukrainian nationalists. Because of course, one can shout, "Damn Russia! Long live independent Ukraine! We want to join NATO, we want to join Europe." Yes, yes, all that. But then, when it comes to participating on the front lines as cannon fodder against the Russian war machine, well, not all Ukrainian nationalists are willing to freely take part. Those who voluntarily, fervently wanted to participate, well, they joined from the beginning, and many of them have turned up dead and buried due to the tragic death toll of this war. So those who are sent off as cannon fodder, above all, are the Hungarians, or the Hungarian Ukrainians, the Hungarian minority within Ukraine, who have Ukrainian citizenship. Naturally, these people are also sent off as cannon fodder. And from there comes the accusation of this discrimination in sending them to die against the Russian bear. The incident, in this context, of this man beaten to death, and of course also, obviously, the ongoing attacks by Ukraine against the Russian pipeline, responsible for supplying gas and oil, not only to Hungary, but also to Slovakia, attacked again and again by Ukraine, causing many problems, because that is the only way these countries can get energy. Why? Because Hungary and Slovakia lack coastlines, right? So they can't generate energy exchange, the exchange of fossil fuels through gas ships or oil tankers, right? Since they can't do that, the only way is through this pipeline, if I remember correctly, called Druzhba, the pipeline. I might be making a mistake. You can help me by correcting the name of that pipeline. So, the situation is very heated, and the Hungarians respond to this, just like the Slovaks, with Fico, on one hand, rejecting entry into the European Union, and on the other hand, also rejecting the sanctions, although they initially reject them. And then, due to pressure from the European Union against these countries, against Slovakia and Hungary, they eventually accept them in exchange for some agreement. Remember that both Hungary and Slovakia have very small populations, 10 million inhabitants in the case of Hungary, a very small country within Europe. If I remember correctly, almost 4 million are in Budapest, meaning that 3/4 of the Hungarian population are concentrated in the capital city. These countries are highly dependent on European funds, so they are subject to the possibility of blackmail. They become the target of extortion by the, for them, all-powerful European Union, or above all, the all-powerful European Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen. So initially, these countries always reject sanctions against Russia, not out of any affinity with Russia, but because they create distance and interrupt the economic relationship with Russia, which is fundamental for them due to their need for Russian energy. So first, they reject the sanctions. Then, from the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen starts threatening that no more funds will be dispersed. In many cases, the interruption of European funds for these key countries was indeed decided. They carried out other acts of extortion and discrimination, such as when Hungary held the presidency of the European Council. The Hungarians were not able to hold the meeting, as is customary in these cases, in their own country, but instead had to hold it in Brussels, since the European Council meeting in Budapest was not validated. Well, as you were saying, at one point there was even the threat of starting a process so that the European Union's foreign policy decisions would no longer be determined by unanimity, by agreement of all countries, but rather, at some point, they presented and still present the possibility of creating an exceptional mechanism for the European Union to move forward with more sanctions against Russia, more sanction packages, even with the vetoes of Hungary and Slovakia. It would be a sort of exceptional package voted on by the majority, but without Hungary and Slovakia, despite the vetoes of these countries, something openly contrary not only to the letter, not only to the legal framework of the European Union, but also to its spirit and its supposed democratic nature. Everyone participates by mutual agreement, and issues related to foreign policy, common issues, are determined by consensus among all. It's not like, oh well, since Germany, the most powerful, and France want this, then everyone else. Yeah, go cry to the church. No, that's not how it works. Well, they want that. And several times they used it for extortion. They presented it as a threat, indeed. Yes, well, that's the context. That's why Peter Szijjártó's tweet, "You Ukrainians, with a totally anti-Hungarian policy, with the bombing of the Russian gas pipeline essential for Hungarian energy, with the mobilization of the Hungarian minority sent as cannon fodder to the war, with this case of the Hungarian beaten to death, with the deprivation of rights in general of this Hungarian minority for a long time, an accusation from Hungary even before the war, and on top of that, afterwards, they blame us for some supposed drones." This is Peter Szijjártó's response. And shortly after, another exchange of blows, this time from the Ukrainian side. Why? Because the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, the burly, gigantic guy, about 2 meters tall and 120 kilos, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, responded to the previous post, right here below, from President Zelensky. He's going crazy with his anti-Hungarian obsession. Now he's starting to see things that don't exist. Sybiha replied no less. Respondió nada más y nada menos Sybiha lo siguiente. Estamos empezando a ver muchas cosas, Peter. We are starting to see many things, Peter, including the hypocrisy and moral degradation of your government. Its open and covert work against Ukraine and the rest of Europe, acting as a perfect lackey of the Kremlin. This is the Ukrainian foreign minister, characterizing the Hungarian foreign minister, the Hungarian prime minister, and his government as lackeys of the Kremlin. Two neighboring countries, with a Hungarian minority in Ukraine. No matter how many attacks you make against our president, nothing will change what we and everyone else see, Sybiha responded. Well, diplomacy is something else, isn't it? First of all, right? The exchange of insults on Twitter, number one. Insultos por Twitter, número uno. Pero en todo caso con un poco de más nivel, muchachos. But in any case, let's keep it a bit more civil, guys. Not even Trump used such strong insults. Hypocrisy. We're starting to see a lot of things, including the hypocrisy and moral degradation of your government, right? It's open and covert work against Ukraine and the rest of Europe. The Zelensky government apparently represents Europe. It's not part of the European Union, but it represents the voice of Europeans. If someone out there, a Spaniard, a Portuguese, an Italian, a French person, is watching this broadcast, well, who represents you? Who speaks for you? The government of Ukraine. That's how things are. And then you top it off with calling someone a Kremlin lackey. That's a bit much, Andriy. Del Kremlin. Un poquito fuerte, Andriy. Un poquito fuerte, quizás demasiado. A bit harsh, maybe too much. After this, After this outrageous claim, Andriy Sybiha himself is going to present the supposed evidence for this accusation. And pay attention to the evidence presented by this gentleman. A little map here for the blind Hungarian officials. Exact route of yesterday's drone incursion from Hungary into Ukrainian airspace. Our armed forces have gathered all the necessary evidence, and we are still waiting for Hungary to explain what this object was doing in our airspace. And pay attention to the image shown. I'm going to here, just to the side, better, smaller.
Acá, así de costadito, mejor. Más chiquita. Acá, Transcarpatia, y acá supuestamente el punto de...
Here, Transcarpathia, and here supposedly the launch point of one of these two drones. From here, from Saxony, from this town, Chop, they would have travelled in a straight line for 40 kilometers, and once here it would have made a turn, right? It would have, yes, somehow circled this area with this strange maneuver, right? First one way, then the other. And below, by the way, another drone would have hovered, would have followed a path along the border between both countries. On the Ukrainian side, this one here. Well, this down here is, well, first of all, what kind of evidence is this? The evidence of using Photoshop. What kind of proof is this? A little drawing? Not even Photoshop. This was done with paint.
Dibujito, ni Photoshop, esto hecho con el Paint. ¿Recuerdan el Paint para los archivos BMP de los primeros?
Do you remember Paint for BMP files in the early editions of Windows? You know, for people who couldn't really handle graphic programs. Well, the little flag on one side, the little flag on the other, it's honestly laughable. But anyway, the idea of a drone supposedly coming out of Hungary and crossing over the border, well, at least that's more believable, right? Any crazy person with a drone can fly it near the border, over Ukrainian airspace. But this here, with the dotted line, right? The little line here, 40 kilometers. The line went up to here, and then it followed this path, okay? This drone made a turn, circled an area, supposedly for reconnaissance. Well, not very serious, but there's the evidence. There's the evidence, according to Andriy Sybiha.
Andriy Sybiha, y poco después de esto,
and shortly after this, over there in the chat, laughing their heads off, the wreckers, well, this is the real proof. This is this gentleman's official account. After this, logically, he responded once again. Sorry, the previous one, my apologies. The Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs responded once again, based on this madness. And he replied here, "This is fake," in English. "This is false, you shouldn't discredit yourself." Right? Like, what kind of stupidity is this? And finally, this was already today, this afternoon here in Europe. "This is false, you shouldn't discredit yourself." And finally, the intervention of the heavyweight Viktor Orban. This started with, the post just appeared, right? On screen, sorry if I didn't show it.
En pantalla, perdón si no la presenté. Bueno, ustedes me ayudan ahí con el aviso de si apareció la última publicación o no.
Well, you all help me out by letting me know if the latest post appeared on your screen or not. So finally, the other heavyweight wrapped this up. Zelensky started it, and Orban is going to finish it on his own account with this response. Strong as well, but accurate and real. Orban's response on the matter, just minutes ago. Hungary is a member of NATO and the European Union. Ukraine would have collapsed a long time ago without the support of these two organizations. President Zelensky, with all due respect, stop harassing us. Strong as well, very strong. With the obvious point that indeed without NATO and the European Union, which Ukraine is involved with, Ukraine would have abandoned the war a long time ago, would have surrendered a long time ago. And on one hand, there's this, with all due respect, but on the other hand, he basically calls them harassers. Stop harassing us. And with good reason, right? Because everything mentioned before about Ukrainian actions against Hungary, well, yes, more than harassers. Yes, more than harassers of Hungary, simply because of their position of taking a stance on the war in Ukraine, tied to their national interest, to the fact that they want Russian energy because they have no other option. And they don't respond stupidly, like the rest of the European countries, to orders coming from the White House, from Washington. War, war, war. And now it's not even war with the United States as the main promoter of the war. But now Trump has decided, well guys, now you're the ones leading this war.
Bueno, muchachos, esta guerra ahora la capitanean ustedes. Nosotros solamente comercializamos las armas.
We only sell the weapons. For us, it's the money. The deaths and the possibility of a direct confrontation are for you Europeans. There's the delegation initiated by Trump, and even explicitly mentioned by Pete Hegseth at that time, at that meeting in Ramstein, Germany, at the beginning of Trump's second term, with the plan laid out there. From now on, we want the Europeans in charge of the war in Ukraine. We want to focus our attention on China. You take care of this, we just sell the weapons. Well, that's the incident. That's the situation.
Esta la situación. Voy a presentar como yapa, lo llamábamos a esto en Argentina.
I'm going to present as a little extra, we called it that in Argentina, like changui or yapa, a final bonus, a little gift, something more on another topic, about the supposed Trump plan to end the war in Gaza. Some videos, some important points. First, I want to remind you, of course, to please help us, support us with a thumbs up, a like, and of course by subscribing and commenting. Every interaction with the platform gives us greater reach, and therefore, less chance of censorship in the ongoing demonetization of our videos, always without justification. But well, that's the kind of censorship we have to deal with.
Pero bueno, esa es la forma de censura contra las voces críticas, sí, la desmonetización.
Against the critical voices. Yes, demonetization, without any basis. Then whenever we start an appeal against the demonetization, they reactivate monetization 2 weeks later. Who wants a live broadcast 2 weeks later? No one, obviously. But well, that's how they want us to abandon certain topics. The issue of Ukraine, the issue of Israel, the issue of the United States when it undertakes its imperialist adventures around the world. You help us with the thumbs up. The more interaction, the more our message, our videos, our analyses, our images are spread, and therefore the harder it is to censor us. That's the mechanism.
Ese es el mecanismo. Por otro lado, quiero recordar la...
On the other hand, I want to remind you about the spectacular debate that took place last Thursday between Fernando Moragon and Joseph H. about the war in Ukraine, Russia, Putin. Something rarely seen. Since the beginning of the war, the mainstream Western media have been hammering away with a single narrative. Critical media present their critical perspective, which is fine, but there are rarely confrontations between analysts from both sides, from both camps. And we were able to hold a debate of that kind last Thursday in the first debate, the first controversy of a series called Demolishing Myths and Politics, with debates featuring Fernando Moragon on one side and Peter H. on the other. Peter H., a political analyst from Miami, with a position opposed to Fernando's, obviously to Fernando Moragon's. Don't miss it, because it was a great debate. It appears below in about an hour. Advertisement, also in an hour, Juan Antonio Aguilar on Gaza, on our sister channel MPG Política. And with the ad done.
Y hecha ya la publicidad, y perdón si a veces machaco y machaco con estos anuncios, pero bueno.
And sorry if I sometimes go on and on with these announcements. But well, that's our job. And if you support us, we can do it. We can provide for our families, and then we can do our work. If you don't support us, we can't. That's why there's a need for a bit of self-promotion. Okay, that's the end of the commercial break. Now, let's present this, folks. Today's big news, from just a few hours ago. This, none other than with Trump, from the White House, as he was leaving for one of his many trips.
La Casa Blanca, a la salida hacia alguno de sus muchos viajes, de fondo el ruido del motor de su helicóptero.
In the background, the noise of his helicopter's engine. Here, already back from New York, where he participated in the general debate of the General Assembly, of the 80th session of the General Assembly, which began a few days ago and is currently underway, with a regrettable speech by Netanyahu. Warmongering, terrible. We will obviously present it tomorrow on Demolishing Political Myths, Conversations with Fernando Moragon. Also, well, the speeches of the leaders. Lavrov's, very interesting, the Russian foreign minister. Starmer's speech. Well, we'll present all of that tomorrow. Trump already back in Washington, and suddenly with this bombshell.
The
Creo que alcanzamos un acuerdo en Gaza o estamos muy cerca del
I think we've reached an agreement in Gaza, or we're very close to reaching an agreement in Gaza. I think we have an agreement in Gaza, once again. I think we have an agreement in Gaza.
Creo que es un acuerdo que va a hacer que
I believe it's an agreement that will ensure the hostages are returned.
that will end the war. Será un acuerdo que finalizará la guerra.
It will be an agreement that will put an end to the war.
I think we have a deal. That'll be number 8, Peter. Será un gran acuerdo y en complicidad con un periodista.
It will be a great agreement, and in collusion with an American journalist, obviously close to his government, named Peter. He always answers to Peter, right? And Peter, this will be the 8th agreement. This will be the 8th war we have ended. No one can determine what the other 7 are. Let's remember the stupidity said about the war between, let's see, Bayan, not Azerbaijan. Let's see, Bayan and Albania, instead of Azerbaijan and Armenia. And then at another time, between Armenia and Nepal. Armenia and Nepal, Nepal near China, Nepal 5,000 kilometers from Armenia. Well, that's the war. 2 of the 7. Well, now an 8th with this one.
Una octava con esto. ¿Algo más aquí?
Anything else? No, that's fine.
No, hasta ahí. Ese será el número 8, Peter. El número...
This will be number 8, Peter. The 8th war ended by Trump. And here's something more interesting. Beyond Trump's usual irreverence, his brazenness, this shamelessness, this persona of his, straight out of reality shows, of television. In this case, he's making statements about a terrible issue, because ultimately the end of the war, or at least the end of the genocide against the people of Gaza, would mean the end of the deaths. So he's making an announcement about a thorny, terrible, tremendous, tricky issue. Even so, he brushes these things off like a joke, about the weather, or about someone. Here's something reported by the Financial Times.
Algo de lo reportado por Financial Times. Trump
presents a new peace plan for Gaza to Arab and Muslim leaders. It is not clear whether Israel will accept the proposal for a permanent ceasefire, which includes a limited role for the Palestinian Authority. He has now come up with this so-called new plan. Israel has not endorsed it, much less the Palestinians, but he has already started presenting this as the end of the war, the agreement to end the war. And here is something published by Trump himself on his social network just minutes ago. Nothing more, also in Spanish. Now yes, this is the post. I am pleased to report that we are having very inspiring and productive conversations with the Middle Eastern community about Gaza. Intense negotiations have taken place over 4 days and will continue as long as necessary to reach a final agreement. All the countries in the region are involved. Hamas is very aware of these talks, and Israel has been informed at all levels, including Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. There is more goodwill and enthusiasm to reach an agreement after so many decades than ever before. There is more willingness than ever before to reach an agreement. That is the correct translation. Everyone is excited to leave behind this period of death and darkness. It is an honor to be part of this negotiation. We must recover the hostages and achieve lasting peace. Well, what is the idea behind this delusional plan? Not approved by either Israel or Gaza.
Aprobado ni por Israel ni por Gaza. Quizás es el primer acuerdo entre Gaza y el gobierno.
Perhaps this is the first agreement between Gaza and the government, between Hamas and Netanyahu's government, to reject this plan, possibly the only agreement possible between both parties. Basically, this plan would determine that the Israeli armed forces would withdraw to the positions agreed upon in the framework of the hostage exchange deal carried out between Hamas and Israel months ago, the only more or less significant agreement, from which, by the way, Israel was able to secure the release of hundreds of hostages. If Netanyahu's government truly wanted the release of the hostages, then it would make a second agreement like the first, because with that they managed to free a lot of people alive.
acuerdo como el primero, porque con eso generó la liberación de un montón de gente con vida. Ahora la gran mayoría parece muerta de esos rehenes.
Now, the vast majority of those hostages appear to be dead, and, moreover, Netanyahu never wanted the release of the hostages. He only wants the destruction of Gaza, its ethnic cleansing, and its annexation to Israel. That has been the plan from the beginning. Well, this plan would supposedly require Israeli troops to withdraw to the positions they held at the time of that first agreement, and in those intermediate territories, right? Well, there, they would establish an international military force, made up, among other things, of soldiers from Arab countries. To me, it's delusional. Honestly, a delusion. The Netanyahu government is not going to approve it in any way. It will never approve it.
Jamás tampoco lo va a convalidar. La implementación real de esto parece.
The actual implementation of this would seem very complex. Some would have to withdraw, others would not make advances in the middle, establishing these international troops. Formed by whom? Soldiers from where? From Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar. Well, he is already presenting it as the eighth war ended by Trump. Meanwhile, Netanyahu delivered a tremendous speech today at the United Nations, extremely long. Everyone is allowed to speak for 15 minutes, but Trump and Netanyahu were able to go on for almost an hour with their time at the United Nations. And basically, in today's speech, Netanyahu, will present it in detail tomorrow in the analysis, made a call for the total capture of Gaza, the capture of the West Bank, and openly rejected the possibility of a Palestinian state. All or nothing, just like that, kill or be killed. That's Netanyahu's policy. And on the other side, there are very few responses from the international community, unfortunately. Devastating. In 40 minutes, Juan Antonio Aguilar will begin his broadcast today about Gaza. We'll be back here tomorrow for the Sunday Talk with Fernando Moragon. Once again, I recommend last Thursday's debate.
Una vez más, recomendado el debate del jueves pasado. Ayúdenos, por favor, con la suscripción, no solo a este canal.
Please help us not only by subscribing to this channel, Demolishing Political Myths, but also to our sister channel, MP Geopolitics, and now also to our English language channel. Yes, something quite unusual. We've already started publishing the latest talk with Fernando Moragon, dubbed in English. Help us by subscribing. The channel name, well, it's already listed in the description. It's the same, instead of Demoliendo mitos de la política, in English. Demolishing Political Myths. So we're going to start that. Help us spread the word, English-speaking friends, people who don't know Spanish, so we can share our critical analysis, our message of peace, of humanism, of enough with so much madness and death, as much as we can. Demolishers, a kiss and a hug. We love you very much. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Hasta la próxima. Chau, chau.